One of our customers wants us to respond to NCRs via corrective actions. However, it seems like a lot of work. Is that really required?
Wow, the never-ending corrective actions and NCRs. This is a big deal for me because this is almost like a mind shifting. When I hear people doing corrective action in all NCRs, I almost feel like that's just not possible. Now, no, don't take me wrong, you may be doing that and it might be possible for you, but surely I don't see how that is really practical. So let me just explain. First of all, in the ISO and API standards, specifically the ISO 9001, API Q1 and API Q2, which are the management system standards that use NCRs the most, or they have the requirements for non-conforming outputs or non-conforming product or non-conforming service. What they advocate is that you measure or track your non-conformances in your product or your services. And what they also require is that you have some way of tracking whether they are being maybe used as is, return to vendor, rework, scrap, just so you see the level of waste you might have or inefficiencies. And so let's back up a little bit. Where are these non-conformances coming from? And I'm talking about these product or service non-conformances. Well, some of them, it could just be inherent to your process. So for example, when you start a line, if you are in a chemical business or you are in plastics, when you turn the machines, as you adjust them, as you run the first batches of materials, there is waste. This is just normal because the material is heating up, the machines are heating up, things are being fine-tuned, and this could be a few minutes, or this could be even up to an hour, where you are scrapping that material, and that is just part of the process. You are maybe having a little off color until you get the color right, depending on what it is. You're getting maybe some of the test, not perfectly, but you are adjusting until you do. Maybe some of the product, it is not the right pressure yet, and so it takes a few minutes for everything to start kicking, and once it does, then you start running, right? That's what in production normally that's called, you start running. And so it starts the process, and now you made some scraps. You made some product scrap, some material scrap, and it could be a little, and that just is part of it, right? And now your company may start and stop a few times a day, or maybe a few times a week, but you know kind of what the level of scrap you make, and so you want to track it. Why? Because maybe you realize week after week, yeah, we make about, let's say, between 50 and 40 pounds of whatever material you are scrapping. But 1 week or 2 weeks, you start like making 300 pounds, right? And I'm just really giving an example so you can understand. And then you say, wait a minute. For the past 2 years, we fluctuate between 50 and 100 pounds of scrap every time we start our run. And now we are like at 300. What happened? So that gives you an idea of what the scrap is. Or the same thing if you send the customer product and there is usually 1 or 2 products. Let's say you're sending hundreds of cables and maybe 1 or 2 are gonna be damaged and the customer returns it. But there's always a level of it. But then all of a sudden, instead of getting 1 or 2 back, you're getting 10 or 20. And so you wanna track NCRs, the return, those non-conformances, because that way you can see, hey, I'm normal or I am not normal. And so because of that, the standard has that place for it in the requirements. But when you track it, you can see, hey, am I going up? Am I going down? Am I staying at the level? And when you go up, or if you have a trend, or when you suddenly see a big shift, that's when you want to put corrective action. And guess what? Corrective action is actually a whole other clause of the standard. Why do you think the standard put corrective action in one clause and nonconformances in another clause? Nonconformance outputs or product or service in another clause? Because they are two different things. So what I'm getting back to is an NCR doesn't necessarily need a corrective action every time it happens. You just need to disposition. We're going to scrap it. What are you going to do this today with that nonconformance? We're going to rework it. What are you going to do today with the nonconformance? Well, we might return it to the vendor. You do something with it. But it is when those times where you see a trend, or when you see a shift, when you see a pattern starting to develop negatively in the wrong direction, that's when you say, let's put corrective action. Now, why do I also think that it is just not possible to do corrective action in every NCR? Is because corrective action is not to be taken lightly. While saying rework it, so you grab whatever scrap you may and put it back on the mill, put it back on the mixer, and flush it again. Doing corrective action requires time, requires people, requires head thinking. We need to call the engineer, we need to call the quality person, we need to call the quality manager, we need to call the operations manager. Let's all sit together and let's all start looking at why this happened. Let's utilize a root cause analysis technique, like the 5 whys, or maybe just a simple brainstorming, or maybe a fishbone chart, any other technique that we can say, why did this happen? When did we start having, twice or 3 times as much nonconformances? We all need to sit together and look at the problem from the bottom. This is where you've probably always seen the iceberg, right? Where you see the little iceberg on top of the ocean, and then you think that's the problem. That's not the problem, that's the symptom. The problem lies underneath, and that's what you want to try to get to. And this doesn't take a few minutes of filling out a form. It takes some time for people to put their heads. Now, once you find the root cause, you now have to develop the actions. Okay, what are we gonna do about it? What are you gonna do about it? What are you gonna do about it? What is everybody going to do so that this problem is completely gone? That's what a good root cause analysis and corrective action is supposed to have. And so if you're going to do that on a non-conformance, then it is not something you can do very easily and fast. In fact, a good corrective action even requires time. You need to give the problem at least 3 months to see if it reappears. Well, or at least that's what we normally advocate. It's like, wait 3 months to see if the problem happens again. So if you had a line that was creating, let's say, 50 to 100 pounds of scrap in our humble example, and now it's making 200-300 pounds, right? And so we sit together, we figure out what the root causes are, and we put the actions in place. Well, guess what? Now we need to, first of all, the actions take time to put together, right? Probably not a day, probably, let's say, a week. And then we'll say, okay, let's wait another month to see what happens if the trend goes down. So right there, we're talking about a month and a half maybe, right? So it takes time. You couldn't do that on every NCR, on every nonconformance. And for that reason, the answer to your question is no. Every NCR does not need a corrective action. But when you do one, it really requires some amount of work. So Well, hopefully that demystify the NCR versus corrective action issue, and hopefully that answer your question. Until next time, stay awesome, stay compliant.